Remember, you are stronger than you think. Don't believe me? We're about to prove it. Welcome back. This is Jen Lee, creator and host of I Need Blue podcast, True Crime to True Life. As a survivor of armed robbery and abduction, I understand the trauma and triggers survivors experience. Knowing this, and through my powerful podcast, I offer survivors a safe place to share their lived experiences. Survivors need blue to feel they belong, they are loved, understood, and my favorite, empowered. Please note, I Need Blue does contain sensitive topics which could be triggering. Please seek help if needed, and remember, you always come first. I Need Blue episodes can be found on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and many listening platforms, including my website, www.ineedblue.net. There, you will find all the episodes, valuable resources, safety tips, my newly released book and ebook, Why I Survived by Jennifer Lee. And if your passion is to learn to podcast, you will find a Learn to Podcast PDF available as well. I would like to thank Shar Good, the talented violinist who composed and performed this opening music. You can find information about Shar Good on my website. As always, thank you for listening. Let's begin today's episode. What is it like to be the spouse of a law enforcement officer? Lauren was the proud wife of Deputy Kobe Seckinger for 16 years. She witnessed the way he compassionately treated others in his community and the respect he received in turn. He was highly dedicated and decorated. As his spouse, Lauren could see how the shift work, long hours, and continual exposure to traumatic scenes were taking a toll on him. More recently, the way the media has portrayed our officers and first responders, one moment feeling like a hero and the next like a villain, the message that it must be all officers who are evil is simply wrong. Polarizing such a false statement is taking a toll on our first responders' morale and mental health. Even in Lauren's home, her husband didn't want them to have a thin blue line flag displayed. He didn't want his family to be associated with his officer career. He felt like a target and feared for his own life. I can't imagine the stress he must have felt, and I can't imagine the stress any first responder feels. Lauren is here today to discuss how she became the first responder trying to save her husband's life. Amongst all the conversation about being prepared for the dreaded phone call or when other officers arrive at the door to say, "We're sorry, ma'am, your husband is no longer with us," Lauren and her husband never prepared for this moment. Today's conversation with Lauren is focused on healing and prevention. How do you prioritize your recovery and get to a place where it is okay for you to have joy again? How do you have an identity beyond being the wife of a law enforcement officer? How do we prevent other officers from dying this way? When do we prioritize the overall health of our first responders and create that space for them to heal without feeling like they have lost their identity? Lauren, thank you for being my guest today, and welcome to the I Need Blue podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for this interview as well. So I'm really curious as to what it was like for you, a spouse of a law enforcement officer.
Well, I met my husband and I was 21 and he was not a cop yet. And we started to get serious and he said, "I'm going to the police academy." I was like, what? Never foresaw myself married to law enforcement. And I was like, well, let's do it. 16 years he served. And there was definitely some adjustments, and you can definitely see why they have it's somewhere up to like 85% divorce rate in law enforcement. They had rotating shifts, and every couple of months he'd be on night shift and then day shift, 12-hour shifts, overtime. The first couple of years you're a rookie, so you have to work all the holidays, right? Like you can't take time off. I learned quickly that you have to humble yourself and you take backseat to the job, right? Like you learn quickly to be number two when you're married to a first responder or any kind of really civil servant, right? And so it took some adjusting. Night shift was hard at first. And then we got in a really good rhythm. I didn't mind it. And, I had a lot of friends that are spouses and they could not handle it. We watched the marriages end. We watched some people give ultimatums and have their spouses go to like a desk job or an investigations job that the schedule was a little easier on. And for me, it was, is this your calling? Is this what you're supposed to be doing? Do you get your joy off of like being on the road and having action? And the answer to that was yes. So it was like, okay, we do this. You could die on your way to a desk job that you hate, right?
Right.
So to me, as long as this was what my husband was supposed to be doing, then we were going to make it work,
So you literally went into it then with a surprise of like, whoa, I want to be a law enforcement officer. What was the first thought that went through your head?
You're 21, 22. Being a cop really wasn't like the cool thing to do. He always wanted to be in the military. That was his dream. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL. His dad is a former Marine. He was in Top Gun. He was a flight instructor. He was a pilot. He was pretty bad mamma jamma. And so Kobe really wanted to do that, but he had a seizure disorder that kept him from being able to join the military. So cop did make sense for him. A lot of people, like the spouse, will wrap their identity in, I'm a law enforcement spouse. And I worked in restaurants, corporate training, and gone a lot. We kind of kept our separate identities, which I think helped us. But I can also see if you're too detached, where some marriages didn't make it, because over time they become very jaded and they see a lot. Of course, they common bond with other law enforcement. So we had to find this balance of we have our own lives, but we support each other and listen to each other. You have to like kick all your expectations out of the door. Like he's probably not going to be there on the birthday or Christmas. So we just do it the next day. And so it was kind of learn as you go. Quite a few years before I would say I was probably a pro.
Wonderful. I have to ask you this question because I am a mom of 2 Marines. And I remember the moment they said, I'm going to boot camp. Immediately as the mom, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want that knock on my door. I don't want there to be war. I don't want my son killed. That was just immediately where I went until I reeled it in.
Right.
And took myself out of it and then really had to think about what this is their life. This is what they want to do. When he said, I want to be a cop, did you think about that? Oh my gosh, I don't want a phone call. I don't want to knock on my door. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It was funny because at first, not really. We were dating and we were getting very serious. So once we got engaged and we were living together, once he was on the road, that's like I would start to worry. He was still a rookie. You think about, if they get shot, right? Or if they get, hurt by a criminal. But what you don't think about is the amount of time they're in a car on the road. A couple months after he was hired, a young cop died in a single car crash. He hit a tree. He hydroplaned in the rain. And the tree kind of just went down on his car, and he was out there for a little bit because it was 5 a.m., dark, rainy. And that kind of heightened my fear because, gosh, he's in the car. And I got to tell you, over his 16-year career, there was quite a few car accidents, and he was good. And then like working night shift when they wouldn't come home, having that thing of, hey, you got to at least shoot me a text that your call ran over, or you have to go drop evidence off, or those fears kind of came in and came out. He had one big call. I would always get a phone call from him and it would say, first off, I'm okay. And I'm like, oh, here we go, you know? And sometimes that was a car accident. And sometimes that was a call his friends were on and he wasn't there for. I didn't worry as much, but I would get phone calls from friends all the time. We saw a cop was hurt on the news. Was it Kobe? And I'm like, no, he's fine. One time the call was after a shootout. And he came home with a big cut on his eyebrow. And I was like, what is that from? And a bullet had hit a fence post right in front of him and splintered off. And I'm like, well, that could have been very different, you know? But for the most part, and especially in the first 10 years, it was more of a worry about the little things. But I really tabled a lot of that because I knew he was doing what he loved. And I knew he was safe and he was not reckless. And so I was able to handle that. And I know a lot of people can't. And then we had always, had a group of friends that said, should something happen, we will come to your house. We will deliver the news. Like they had this pact with each other for years. So you had that comfort of that community. In the last 6 years or so, the climate in the world started to change. And the viewpoint on cops and the violence towards cops started to change. And that did heighten my fear. What if he's just sitting down at lunch and somebody targets him? Or, he does a traffic stop. That danger became much more real because it wasn't just if you were in a volatile call, it was they were being targets and sitting ducks. And another big fear was, he would do something or say something and someone could ruin his career with that. They started questioning their judgment. And that's when it started to get scary, is a lot of good cops were starting to be scared to make a call and to do something. So I would say in that last 6 years was a shift with the fear level, but majority of the time I was good.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine that fear. For me, because law enforcement rescued me, that is my story and that is my situation.
Right.
I can't imagine making a phone call and them being like, sorry, don't have law enforcement available or they're busy or it's going to be a while. Until you have to make that phone call, you don't really have an appreciation of really how much we need them.
Yeah.
But how did you deal then with everything that was going on the past few years? I mean, it's all over social media. It's all over TV. It's conversation everywhere. So how did you deal with seeing all of that on social media and on TV? And
yeah. So number one, I am heavily rooted in my faith. And so I know for me who is in charge and I know how it turns out. And I know that no matter what is crashing around us, right? This life is a vapor. I really root myself into that, is whose am I? And, my focus stays on that. And then it's funny because as a young person, I battled with depression and I was very negative. As I got older and just went through an awful lot, I just learned that, God doesn't promise us that he actually promises that we will have trouble. And it's a perspective shift on how you walk through it. I became a very much a glasses half full kind of person. And I can look at a situation and say, yeah, this is tough and this really stinks, or this is hard. And it's not to say there weren't days I was on the ground crying. Like he'd go off to work and, I'd cry and be like, make sure he's okay. I definitely would focus myself every morning on that and give thanks to that this calling is his and that it is hard, but he is equipped and I am equipped. It got tougher as it started to wear on him. He was a very positive person. And there were times in the last few years of his life that I could see some of that joy kind of draining and that pride. And this was something that, and many cops do this, it's their identity. He was very cautious, overly cautious, I would say. He parked his cop car in the driveway and he didn't even love that. So we were not one of those families where I had he would not even allow me to wear a shirt that said law enforcement wife, or my Leo is this or that. We did not have a thin blue line flag at the house. We do now. He would not drive his car off duty. He would not Our daughter did not ride in that car but once when she was injured and he had to go pick her up from school. He was very cautious to separate family from work. And for a while as a spouse, I was like, we don't go to the barbecues. We don't go to the things. We don't do all the hoorah. And he's like, I don't need that. I would often question myself. I'm like, am I a bad cop wife? Like, am I bad? And he's like, no, I would prefer it this way. Like it was a very separate thing, and it was a protection thing for him. That both gave fear, but also gave peace, right? That I didn't have to look like the rest of the cop wives to be a good cop wife. I just needed to support my guy and what made him feel safe and secure at work and out of work.
And what was that made him secure?
He just liked to plan. He liked to look at all the risks. And so for him, separating that work life, it took a lot of years because a lot of law enforcement, like I said, that's their identity. Their friends are all cops. They have a hard time talking to people who are not, because people either want all the stories or they want to be negative. And after a while, he realized that having friends outside of the badge was important, that we did not have to identify ourselves as that. It was a big switch for him. And so he still went into this job with great pride and great care, but he was learning that when he was off, he was off. And it took many, many years for that to come around. I think that helped to give him some peace.
The consistent message I get from first responders is you have to have friends that are not first responders.
Yeah, they all say that, and then they all realize how hard that is. And then I think they all get humbled and come back to that later,
I imagine that would be hard because, people are curious. They want to be just like the quote normal person. Like, let's talk about our kids in school and, all of that other fun stuff that we talk about.
Well, yeah. And, early on in his career, that was it. Like, I got all the exciting calls. Oh, I went on this call today and this person did this and this was crazy and this was the action. And then as the calls got harder and the time went on, you hear about it a little less, right? And then you hear about all the politics of it, all the office drama and all the stress. And so the last couple of years was real tough with everything happening in the world, everything happening within. He was definitely battling a lot of, I don't know how to put it, but just like office stuff, right? Like people and work and superiors and trying to make all the right calls and feeling like you're walking on eggshells because you do one wrong thing and you could lose your livelihood or your life. I think that's even the toughest part, when that kind of stuff is creeping into what the job actually is asking you to do, right? Like you can't even focus on why you're doing what you're doing. And actually the couple months before he passed, he had a big revelation, and he gave up his sergeant stripes and he just focused on being a road deputy and mentoring new cops on how to be healthy, which is ironic, but how to be just healthy in your life, like your work-life balance, and how to be a good cop, but of good character. And he was finding a lot of joy and kind of returning back to that.
Yeah. And now for him to be healthy and his mental health, were there resources available and did he utilize them?
So they have resources available. I feel like it's more reactive than proactive. So yeah, there's therapy available. And you go through a call or a shooting and it can be mandatory. Or you can request it and you can get it through your insurance. Not to stereotype, but a lot of law enforcement types are not going to do that voluntarily. If he goes and talks to someone and they say he's unfit, or he goes and sees a doctor and they say he's unfit and he has to go to desk duty, and this is a guy who lives for the road. So they tend to try and just take care of it with exercise or whatever. And their diets are often poor because they're working all crazy hours and they're in a car all day. And there are resources available. There are PT tests they do, but doing push-ups, sit-ups, running, doing an obstacle course does not tell you how healthy you are on the inside. So their bodies are kind of battling each other. And so they would have health screenings where, you do a little prick of your finger and all of that. Of course, your health insurance offers more, but nothing really on the proactive mandatory side. Today's world and mental health and what's happening, outside of that, it's pretty tough. Because you look at someone, my husband looked very healthy. He was slim. He ran multiple times a week. he would get on a call and he would jump the fences and do all the things. And he was 42. By all means, looking at him, you wouldn't have even known. So people often kind of look over that, right?
Right. Can you share then what happened to your husband?
It was December 14th of 2020. And he came back from a shift, a day shift, came home, changed clothes, put on his running shoes. It had been not a terrible shift, but not the easiest. Some domestic violence calls and some traffic stops, and I think an Amber Alert that day as well. And so he came and he put in his headphones, he put on his running shoes, and we literally passed each other in the kitchen. I was coming back from teaching all day, and he gave me a kiss on the forehead and said, "I'm going for a run." I was like, okay. It was December, so it got dark early. And when he wasn't back for about 45 minutes, I started to get a really bad feeling. But I'm a worrier, and he would always get upset with me for kind of worrying too much. So I kind of fought my gut instinct, and then finally was like, I'm going outside. He's probably in the garage gossiping to his work wife, about the day. When I walked out and heard quiet, I was concerned, and I found him on the driveway, unresponsive, kind of laying flat. And so I had seen a head injury, and I had started CPR. I kind of knew in my heart in that moment that he wasn't there, but I kept going. And then some of my neighbors joined, and one of them is a firefighter. So I had a couple people helping. They got him into the ambulance and into the hospital, but the whole ride to the hospital, I kind of knew, right? Like, you just can know. So I got to the hospital, and they had told me he was gone. I was in shock that night, really. And, you prepare for that knock on the door, but we never prepared for me to be the first responder. So I'm trying to deal with that. And then, one big fear of a law enforcement spouse is, and of the actual law enforcement officer, is if something happens to me off duty. So it's set up that if something happens to first responder in the line of duty, their families are really taken care of for that sacrifice. This was, at home. And the next morning I get a phone call from my liaison at the sheriff's office, a very good friend of ours. He had spoken to the medical examiner, and he used the word line of duty. And I was in shock because I was like, he was at home. I had figured he had had a seizure and had succumbed to the head injury, but that was not it at all. He actually had an arrhythmia, a stress-induced arrhythmia, where basically his heart just seized and he died before he hit the ground. He had no prior heart condition, nothing. And so in the state of Florida, there's something called the heart and lung law. And I believe it's all across the country. I don't know for sure if it's every state or others are kind of catching on board. But for Florida, the heart and lung law says that any first responder that dies of a heart issue or a lung issue that was not documented, so they did not come on board with this kind of health issue,
like a pre-existing condition,
that they could be ruled an in-line of duty death. So after all, the medical examiners found that this was a buildup in his heart over time that kind of thickened it through stress. You're going on all these stressful calls and your blood pressure is spiking up and down. And then he's exercising. He's excessively training to be fit for the job. There is another guideline that says, like, if it's within a certain amount of hours after shift. And so this was not even 2 hours after shift. All of that kind of lined up into ruling his death an in-line of duty death, where he then gets honored for that sacrifice. And that was a very humbling news to receive. It was just humbled me greatly, because it is recognized that all of this stress that's been happening in the last few years and over the whole 16 years, but especially in the last, 5 or 6 years, all that stress, the way the world views them. And one day they're a villain and one day they're a hero. And it just goes back and forth like ping pong. Being hyper vigilant all the time, that you can never truly relax, because even if no one knows you're a police officer, you do. And so if you're sitting at a restaurant, you're never facing your back to the door. You're never, you're always ready. You're always on. And so that constant stress, plus the physical stress and the shift changing stress, all that builds up over time. It's something that could have been detected if he was going to like routine in-depth physicals. The only thing is with this condition, if his heart wasn't in an arrhythmia, it could sound normal. So he would need something more in depth, like the running stress tests, right? And the EKGs and all of the things. And so that was not something that was a proactive treatment. That was something that if they noticed something wrong, they would react and go.
So part of the conversation then we wanted to have today was that proactive approach to our first responders' health. So what happened to your husband, may not happen to somebody else. And that begins by having a conversation. And I have to imagine for you, you've had this conversation several times already with different people. Have you had any resolution, like anybody that has sat down and listened to you and be like, what can we do to implement to make this happen, to make this required?
I have never sat down and had that like a serious conversation about it. I've talked about it in passing with many of the cops that are a little higher up in our agency and mentioned some things in passing, but never really jumped on like an advocacy train on it as I was working on just my own healing, right? At the time I had to heal and be whole for my daughter. But his death, because my husband, everybody loved him. Everybody loved him. I mean, you're talking about in a COVID year, we had 500 to 600 people at his funeral. He knew people in other agencies, the way he carried himself, the way he cared for the people around him. I saw the dark side at home, right? I saw the really beat down, this world was eating him alive with all of the COVID, all the politics, all of the treatment of police officers. I was a safe place, right? And so when he would get out there, he would mentor and love on people and talk to people the way they needed to be talked to, and very few people that had any issues with him. Those people were usually ones that are threatened by people that are well liked without being a jerk, a leader like who leads from within, a leader who does not need the power. And so he would be quick to jump on a grenade for anybody. So what happened was after his death, it really shocked everyone. They were like, not Kobe. He's like the fittest of all of us. Like he's, like not Kobe. He's our light. Not Kobe. What are we going to do? And it really scared quite a few of our friends. Some of them went on their own insurance and went and got a full workup. Right. And then I guess that conversation had kind of started getting around our sheriff's office. And I was just speaking to one of my friends the other day, and they implemented a program. Right now, there's only 100 people that are allowed to be a part of it, but they go, and he just went and did his running stress test and like this whole, so they are working on doing that, which really filled my heart because they have to worry about enough. And it seems crazy, right? To have to tell grown humans, men and women, that they need to go get checked, right? But especially like we went through COVID, doctor's offices were closed. My husband told me 3 or 4 times, he's like, I feel like I need a physical. But getting into the doctor's office was tough. So sometimes in those positions, those agencies need to make it a requirement that they check their health. Because if anything, you're thinking of, it might sound morbid to somebody, but for me, it couldn't have happened better for my husband the way he went. And some people were like, Lauren, you found him. It was at home. Like, how do you live in your house? I was like, he was home. He was in our driveway. He was not out on the street somewhere. He was not behind the wheel of a car. He was, and I could see it, and that gave me closure, and it was quick. He didn't even know. I find peace in that. But when you're thinking about this proactive approach, he could have been at work. He could have been behind the wheel of a police car going 110 miles down the highway and had a heart attack and killed other people. It's really public safety as well, right? That you make sure that these men and women who are putting themselves to save other people and protect other people, that they are in the safest and healthiest position they can be in to do so. And you talk about mental health as well. His stress from the job and depression from the job, that manifests on you physically. And as our society is starting to take mental health more seriously, I think in these lines of work, and I've got some friends who are widows to suicide, Leo suicide, and they are working, diligently with their sheriff's offices about the recognition of PTSD in law enforcement, and that being a very legit thing instead of being so taboo. Working proactively on that mental health as well. Oftentimes that mandatory therapy comes because they were involved in like a shooting or, some kind of big catastrophe. But there's little calls along the way that build up, and there's office politics and office abuse that builds up and societal. And it's just one of those things. Like, if we want our cops to be the best they can, then we need to make sure that they're being taken care of mentally and physically.
Absolutely. I was listening to you talk, and I don't think it's morbid. I understand, you got closure in a way because you didn't have to wonder how he died or it was quick.
Yeah.
So I have to imagine that probably played a big part in your healing journey.
It did. And at first it was like, why? When I walked out in that driveway and saw him, and I was a teacher, and I had an officer at the school, I think a year later, and I didn't know him personally, but he knew me and he saw me. He was filling in, and he came up to me and he was in tears. He said that he, knew my husband very well, and that he was assigned to the case when Kobe passed. So anytime one of their own dies, somebody gets put on it and they have to review all the calls. They kept asking me if I knew he was on a run, and my husband was very much like Big Brother is tracking me. So he didn't have any of those run trackers, nothing. But I said where I found him and the timing, I said, I'm pretty confident in my husband's routine that he had run his mile and he was cooling down in the driveway. And so this man had to pull camera footage from the neighbors and confirm that he was on his run, and he had to review the 911 tape. He said that I started CPR and I called, and I was trying to get into my husband's car, and I could not find his car keys because I knew there was, the AED, the heart machine. I knew there was one in there, but I could not find his car key. And so I was doing the CPR, and he stopped me and he said, Lauren, I listened to that tape probably, 20 times. You did everything right. You did everything you could do. You knew what to do. You were prepared for a situation that you didn't think you'd ever have to be prepared for. And that was really comforting on my part too. And to know that, I did do everything, and I didn't even really have to do anything, and it's tough because some people are left to wonder, and I definitely got my answers pretty quickly because just 24 hours of wondering was rough. I look back on it and I think that we're equipped.
Right. You're having to be the first responder on your first responder husband. You can never be prepared for that. Part of your healing journey was learning how to find joy and become a priority outside of being a law enforcement officer's wife. Can you tell us about that journey?
Yeah. So I actually stood at the funeral and I spoke in front of everybody, and I said, this should not be the thing that breaks your faith. This should be the thing that makes your faith. 2020 did not steal my husband. The enemy did not win. It was time for him to go home. And he has now won the race. There's no pain, and there's no depression, and there's no, weight of the world on his shoulders. And I sent a message out to the whole sheriff's office kind of saying, as you're waking up to put on your uniform today, have peace knowing he's armored up in heaven and he's got you. And I know that it's with a heavy heart that you do this because I've watched him do it many times. I quickly gave it to God. We had talked many times that one of the reasons he loved me so much was he knew should something happen to him that I would continue to live. I would show my daughter, how to be strong and how to move forward. When things would get really hard, I would remind myself that, right? When you want to, and there were many days I was flat on the floor. I made it a priority, one, to make sure my faith was solid, two, to work on my mental health. I moved my mom in and she helped me with my daughter, which helped me be strong for her and heal myself. I did have some trauma with the CPR. I mean, that's you could taste it, you could smell it, you could hear, like I could hear his ribs crack. I had a wonderful therapist reach out to me. She was a friend of one of my old students' moms. And she knew right away that I was going to need therapy at some point. And she had told this old student of mine, she would offer me some treatments when I was ready. I did something called EMDR. I highly recommend that for any trauma survivor. And it could just be small traumas over time, or it can be one traumatic event. I have had friends do it now for having narcissist abuse for a long time or being in an accident. And it is this amazing treatment that just really helps you get to not only the root of what you're feeling, but it helps you process it. It helps you feel your feelings and then you process them out. And so they don't sit, but they're also not blocked. It was instrumental into helping with my mental health. And then I found resources. I went on a retreat. I was very reluctant to go on it because I'm big on identity, and my identity as a child of God, then wife, then mother, and then I was a teacher at the time. I did not want widow to be my identity. I knew that right off the bat. This is my circumstance. I look at widow as a verb. It's something that happened to me. It is not my noun. It is not who I am. And so I knew I didn't want to bury my identity into that. And I can see how it is so easy for people to do that. And I know people who are, and they advocate well, and they take care of other widows well. But I just felt it on my heart from God that that was not my calling, and that I was supposed to be stewarding what he put in front of me. And so I went on this widows retreat. It was put on by Be Still Ministries and the Gary Sinise Foundation, Widows of Heroes. So law enforcement, firefighters, and military were there. There were 20 of us, and they do these multiple times a year. You can go on their site and apply, try and get selected. They also do them for regular old widows, not just first responder widows. They swept us away to Captiva Island, and we were in a home for 2 days, 20 of us from all over the country. And there was ministry, and there was counseling, and there was joy, and there was wisdom from women who had walked in our shoes and come out the other end. That was huge. I actually just met my friend at Disney. She was here from Ohio. I drove down. And so we have this community, and there's yearly conferences. And I definitely see where I'm glad I did that, because I initially wasn't going to do anything like that. But this puts you in a network of people that care for you. And you really learn to let people love you and to let people do for you, because that's blessing them while they're blessing you. And then I turn that and I pay it forward the best I can. I've been reached out to by another foundation called Tunnel 2 Towers. There's so many resources out there. Seek wisdom, seek mental health wisdom, seek spiritual wisdom. And then I address my physical self. That kind of waited last. There was a lot of weight gain after. Really worked on my strength and being the best I could be as a solo parent, preparing myself to be able to not break down when I can't open a jar or move a couch, and I know I could call anybody and anybody would come and do anything for me, and they still would to this day. But there's something in doing some things for yourself. Women especially will put their kids as their identity in that, and they won't work on their own healing. They kind of bury it into their kids. And that's one thing a counselor talked to us about at that retreat was, you have to take care of you. You have to make sure you're sleeping, get your kids out of your bed. You cannot crutch on your children, to be a replacement. You've got to, and it's tough. But it was definitely what a lot of people needed to hear, that you have to put that oxygen mask on you. Because what happens is the people that bury themselves in that role, it's going to delay and it's going to hit you a year or two down the road, that you have not processed everything you need to process. Happiness is circumstantial. I might not be happy today, but I still have joy, because joy is internal, and joy is based off of just knowing whose you are and knowing that you are loved, and that even if the worst thing happens, there's still good. You don't move on, you move forward, because moving on implies that you are leaving things behind, and that vow to keep my husband's legacy alive, that is healing in me. And so I can be giving to others because that's what he would do. And I can be behaving in a way that I know he would respect, and I would be just making sure that he's a part of everything, and he is. But you can do that without putting them on a pedestal and making your whole life about who's gone. And oftentimes you feel like you'll do something that's really, really great, like a really happy circumstance, and then it'll hit you like guilt. And so then you're crying in the middle of your happy time. And so I learned to, because I'm not an emotional person. I don't really like the feelings. And so I had to learn to just let them out. So when they come, and then I process them. I say, this is why I do it. I feel it. I process it. I release it.
Everything you have said is so amazing. I was at one point I was going to be like, can you share like one piece of wisdom? And then I just let you keep talking. And I was like, wow, like she is like full of wisdom. And so many things that you said are just so universal to a lot of people, to just death in itself, no matter if you were a first responder or not. That was absolutely amazing. I mean, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for letting me ramble on.
I was intrigued. I was like, wow. I was like, I'm learning a lot. Like I was soaking it up. I was like, this is fabulous. And I would just really appreciate you sharing all of that. You're full of healing energy, and just the things that you've learned, and the fact that you want to share them is great, because, God called him home, but you keep his legacy going by talking about him, talking about the healing. And he is proud of you up in heaven every time you sit down and you have conversations like you are today. And I am honored that you are here with me.
I'm honored to be here. This world is dark and it's scary. I am someone who has walked through abuse and loss, infertility, death. But when you kind of anchor into your worth, and that, circumstances can be terrible, right? But there is still so much good to be done. And like, you are worthy. And so I would say, even if you're a law enforcement or first responder spouse with a living partner, know your identity. Know that who you are is important. It doesn't have to look like everybody else. Really finding that kind of peace, and knowing that if you're together forever, that's wonderful. And if something happens and your partner is gone, you can still live life. And it's devastating. Don't get me wrong. There are days that it is still devastating. Every time I look at my daughter and I think, well, her dad's not here, and that's not fair for her, right? I got 18 years with him. She got 8. He's not going to be there for all the big things, right? And so there are days where joy is a choice, and it's a hard choice. But my God, is it worth it? And you're worth it. And no matter what kind of trauma you have survived, you're here, and you're here for a reason. And I think this is the biggest thing for me. You can do that with balance. You do not have to feel like your whole identity is what happened to you. You suffered spousal loss. You do not have to go into a job that takes care of other widows or widowers. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be super involved in changing a law. Some people, that is what they're supposed to do, or starting a foundation or doing this. You can support foundations that do that. I do. And I let them do what they're supposed to do. And I still live in a way that honors and gives. Look into your heart and into whose you are, and be yourself in this. You are not defined by what has happened to you. You are refined by what has happened to you.
That was beautiful. You're not defined, you're refined. Love that. Lauren, thank you for being my guest today on the I Need Blue podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. This is Jen Lee. Remember, you are stronger than you think. Have a good day.